team, your people first, which is throughout the whole story and your sport.
You learn how to communicate. You learn about your body language. You learn how to lose together. You learn how to take positives out of a situation. You learn how to celebrate together.
It's Patel, serial entrepreneur, business builder, speaker and investor, sharing his people-centric approach to building one of the UK's largest sportswear providers and the importance of supporting grassroots sport.
My wife wasn't allowed to play football, got to fail to be successful. You know, we've seen dads with daughters go, right, my daughters want to be a lioness. Screw it, I'm just going to go and set my own club up. By just putting a few tweets and a few posts out there, they're getting 100 girls, 200 girls. And then it's like, oh crap, there's demand and there's going to be a real need to support these female-only clubs.
People are the engine. Businesses are just collections of people.
You've got to be smart with what you operate and what you automate and how you automate it. You can't automate loads of things because otherwise you just get a robot.
I've got a quick favour to ask you. Nearly 90% of people listening to this podcast right now don't follow or subscribe to us. And my goal is to get that down to 80%. So if you've ever liked an episode or a clip that we've put out, please could you click that follow or subscribe button. It helps us more than you know to bring more guests onto the podcast and put out better and better content for you. Thank you. Before we dive into this episode, I want to take a second to speak about our sponsor, Pith Stem, who we are thrilled to have on this journey with us. As someone who is always looking for ways to improve my healthy hustle, Pith Stem's DropTop desk stood out to me as the best full work-from-home solution on the market. The world of work from home is changing, and a laptop or screen perched on your lap or dining room table isn't enough anymore. It's imperative that we have a solution at home that matches our productivity station that we can have in our office. But of course, homes weren't made to be worked in, and not all of us want a dedicated study. That's why I'm so happy that Pith Stem created this perfect solution. They designed this desk with both the needs of the professional and their home in mind. It's perfect because it allows me to have a full productivity station that suits my needs and helps me get the most out of every minute that I spend at it, not only so I work comfortably, but that I actually enjoy it. And the best thing about DropTop, I can close and lock it at the end of the day to keep work and home separate. And it looks awesome on the wall. You can get your DropTop desk anywhere in the world from pithandstem.com or just Google DropTop and you'll find it pretty quickly. Now, let's get on to today's guest. So you spend a lot of time thinking about sports, people who are playing it, the kit they're wearing, the politics, what's going on, and maybe the future of sport. Where did that passion for sport really come from?
So passion for sport really came from my mum. So she played volleyball, even though she's really, really small. She played volleyball at school. And she really pushed myself and my brother to play sport. So whether that was golf, cricket, rugby, football, she was a driving force when we were kids. And then it's kind of snowballed because I wasn't very good. My brother was. And we would compete against each other. And then it kind of accelerated when I went to Loughborough Uni. And I went there to play sport. And I got rejected from the cricket team, and then basically worked my socks off to try and get back in. And that's kind of the building blocks, I think.
Do you think it was always something you were going to go into? Is it a sporty family? No. Was it always on TV?
So my mum's side, yes. My dad's side, no. So my mum's side, my uncles would play five-a-side football, 11-side football. Football was always on whenever we'd go around to people's houses, match of the day. Nothing would happen when match of the day. You know, whatever's happening, everything would stop for match of the day. And then life would continue after match of the day. So we, like myself and my brother, were the eldest of the next generation. So, you know, we were 8, 9, 10 when all our cousins were kids. So we would roll with our uncles, if you know what I mean.
Okay, and they were into cricket?
Football by a long stretch.
Okay.
And then pretty much every other sport was a much of a muchness, but then it was naturally cricket, but they were football men.
And what about now? Do you still play? Do you still keep an eye on the sports other than
so
in the business?
I try.
Really? Okay.
Oh my God, it's just like the dumbest sport is cricket. Like you've got to give up a day, you know, then you can't see your family. The weather in this summer is absolutely awful. So yeah, I've had 2 ducks on the bounce. I've never had that before.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
God.
awful. Absolutely awful.
What part of sport do you think you like? Is it the team part of it, or is it just is it
Yeah,
the day out?
yeah. So team, it's a team aspect. I think you tend to find sociable characters that are attracted to team sports. I did 5-6 years at Speedo, and swimming at competition level is a team sport. Although it's an individual discipline, actually you see very similar traits with cricket and swimming. However, I also was involved in triathlon. Those guys are singular people. You've got a different type of character profile to be a triathlete. You've got to have this tunnel vision. Whereas in team sports, you need that collective approach. No one person is bigger than a team. So I think that bit, I like being around people, always have done. So I think that's probably the reason why.
How important do you think it is for young people to do a team sport versus an individual sport, or a combination?
Massive. So team sports gives you more than winning and losing. So the answer to this question can be found in almost every Disney team sports film, right? So, you know, the rabble that was the Mighty Ducks, and then they turn into something that's, you know, world class. And the kit is actually part of that journey. So if you actually look at a lot of these Disney movies, it is about a set of individuals creating and being part of something bigger than them. And that is the beauty of team sports. So if every kid can be part of that, yes, winning is part of it, but actually being part of that journey is amazing and can teach lifelong skills. If you take the on-pitch and on-court element out of the question, a sports club can give a lot to young people. So, for example, one of the best examples I talk about is a netball club, Hatch Warren Tigers. And the committee was starting out during COVID. A lady called Carla Patterson had the concept. So a couple of months in, they'd really got going. They got a brand, the Tigers. They had a theme song, which is Katy Perry Raw, because they wanted to create confident girls playing sports. And one of the things that they wanted to do was a newsletter. And so the committee really struggled with their own personal time. So as we had these chats, I was like, well, who have you asked? And they were like, oh, we're just looking at a committee. Well, why haven't you asked the 200 girls? So very quickly, they then identified a volunteer. She's about 14, 15, and she wasn't the best player. When I spoke to her, she admitted that she wasn't the best player, but she's absolutely a pillar in that club. And so there's an opportunity for her to get some kind of leadership responsibility off court. She's then got a whole heap of leadership skills that she's now gained. And then on top of that, she's now built a career of which she wants to go into journalism. You know, and so team sports can actually build a whole heap of stuff that's just not about the captain's armband.
I completely agree. And it's really interesting hearing you speak about that example, because I always did team sports. I always played rugby more than football, but a bit of football, a bit of cricket. And then I had an injury during university, so I stopped playing rugby and I took up CrossFit, which is probably a bad idea because there's a lot of injuries in CrossFit. But CrossFit's an individual sport. Yeah. And I always thought, I wish I'd done a singular sport as a kid. So I want to push me into it, because people that had done individual sports in CrossFit, like Antonia, for example, high-level gymnast, like they just had that tenacity of like, I'm going to do this on my own. Yes. And I was always part of a bigger team. But over time, actually, what I found is that I was able to bring the CrossFit community together. I was able to build from their energy, because whilst someone can go really far on their own, actually you can go further if you get that team together. So whilst it's not a team sport, I think there's a lot of power in just 100% building that community.
Yeah, and reading people, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, understanding your teammates' personal pressures, all of them skills, you know, albeit not really that important for the mass population at the age of 8, but actually really transferable 20 years later when you start to get into management positions. So you then start to look at middle managers, senior managers, directors, CEOs, and actually statistically team sports plays a really big part in the success of people's journey in their career. You know, so you may not be a cricketer or rugby player for life, but getting into that environment and getting that skill set during your adolescence periods, you know, it's massive. But also, like, if you take if you actually take a step back and look at things like knife crime, things like deprived areas in India, when young people, in particular boys, don't have male role models, safe environments, they just get up to mischief, and then that creates societal problems. So actually there's a bigger picture of team sports where that discipline of being accountable to more than yourselves, it can actually play a really good part in society.
Well, that's what I want to talk about, because I think your take on sports in general in the community or in society, and then moving that into the way that businesses are run, I think is really interesting. So clearly that you've just touched on there that sport plays a massive role in society. How do you think that will move forward? Are more people playing sports? Are less people playing sports? How is society picturing sport now? Because we've got things like people worried about rugby as a sport. They're worried about heading in grassroots football. How do you think sport will develop, and will that impact the managers and leaders of tomorrow?
So sport isn't going away anytime soon. If you look at our population in the West, people are having less children. So therefore, naturally, there'll be less kids playing sport because there's less kids around, right? So there is a little bit of that. However, we're going to double our playing population because my wife wasn't allowed to play football.
Okay.
Right? So we're only at the very early stage, the baby steps of doubling our playing population. So what we're going to see is a global doubling of playing sports. We might have less people in terms of less children, but actually more of them will play because all sports are now embracing female athletes. So if we go back to when I was growing up in the 90s, girls would only really play rounders and netball. If you're lucky, you might get a bit of hockey chucked in there as well. So what is there a pyramid for rounders? Is there an England team? There's no real aspirational. That isn't an aspirational sport, right? And they were not allowed to play cricket. And even if they did, they were, even at England level, they're wearing skirts. How are you going to field in a skirt, right? So that stuff has changed. When it comes to netball, netball is still the most female participated sport, but they're under a huge amount of pressure from football because if you were a sporty girl, you only really had one option, that was netball, right? So then actually now, I'm really sporty and I'm really competitive. Well, actually I've got loads of options. So netball has to really figure out its product, and it needs to figure out how its infrastructure is working because football, cricket are coming hunting for those girls. And I think hockey's a really interesting one because facilities play a huge part in hockey. So you kind of need to have water-based pitches. People don't play grass-based hockey anymore. So that's an expensive capital expenditure for a club. And there's only a few in the country that have got the best standards facilities, and therefore the hockey players all come from that region. So if you now look at it, that's the 90s, right? That ship has sailed. We look today, well, the FA are doing a really good job of doubling their playing population, big focus on the pyramid, and actually England cricket are probably doing an equally as good, if not better job. And recruitment into sports is now just flying in those two categories. Rugby's a bit different, and there's a whole heap of problems in rugby, governing body downwards, Premier League clubs with financial problems, blah blah blah, all the way down the pyramid there are problems. So in terms of what the future looks like, I see really, really powerful cricket and football on a global level, not just in the UK, because they're really transferable for her. I'm really struggling with other sports right now.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point though, because it's worth saying that this is UK focused, right? But
yeah.
I can remember at school, we'd go out for PE. The boys would go and do rugby, and the girls would just go to the tennis courts and do netball. There was no option.
No.
And even you might have that one girl who would come and play football with you, but they would never be involved as much by the teachers and by the sort of the societal norms of sport.
Yeah.
I've got a really good friend at the minute who works in the Lawn Tennis Association, and they're doing quite a lot for women tennis and also for disability. So that whole inclusion thing is incredible. But the thing that I think is really interesting that you just touched on there is the sort of pyramid. Because you're talking about the pyramid of sports getting wider and then obviously funneling to a wider top level elite sport. But talking about the bottom of that pyramid, how do you think the more people that play sport or have a wider option for sport affects management or job prospects or leadership? Because it sounds like...
You're talking about for the athletes? Is that what you mean?
No, I'm not. I'm talking about for just the wider population. Because if more women are going to play more sports, could that help the problem of women not rising to certain jobs or certain industries, to certain roles? Go on.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. So I think there's two bits to your question, and we'll probably dovetail back to one of the two. So the sporting infrastructure and how that's set up is one part of that question, and we'll come back to that. In terms of what the future looks like for her, the female athlete, we obviously went to a Daniel Priestley event, right? And one of the CEOs talked about his recruitment strategy. We won't mention his name, but he talked about getting... One of his USPs on recruitment was to completely focus and be unrelenting in focusing on recruiting female athletes that have come from a team sport background and putting them into a sales environment. Done. That was his sales team. So I was a bit taken back by that. Why did he want that? Because they're really competitive. They understood good teamwork. They understood when to put their foot down and take their foot off for another player. They know how to assist. They know how to defend, right? And they know actually how to take critical feedback. So that wasn't taken personally. and he actually found they were better than males. They were better than unsporty females. So he was really focused on the way he operated in that space. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So you then kind of look at it and go, yeah, I think that will even the balance out. I think if I look at the women that I know that have risen to those senior positions in various organisations, yeah, they've always had a team sport background. But I'm not saying it's 100% requirement, but it's going to help.
Yeah, for sure. And then you were going to touch on the sporting infrastructure, right, which is that help that they're getting. Yeah,
so we're going to double our playing population, but we're not going to double our infrastructure globally.
I see. Okay, yeah.
So already we're seeing... we're sat in Dubai right now, so I'm pretty certain if we went round, I've seen it, if we went round right now and started to look at pitches, 100% of those pitches are going to be fully chock-a-block with boys' fixtures. Now, those clubs, right now in Dubai, we're at the embryonic stages of professionalism here, but let's just look at the UK, and we look at, the FIA have got a 1, 2 and 3 star programme for grassroots clubs. Those 3-star clubs are massively oversubscribed, especially in the south, where land is at a premium. If they've got 10 pitches on the weekend, they're fully back to back to back. There are certain clubs, some clubs have got over 100 grassroots teams. So just to do the quick maths as to when they're going to play. So I think we're at a point where we're going to go down one or two paths. We either right now, the FA are looking at the 3-star accreditation is only there if you have a men's side, a women's side, and a specific amount of teams. You've got to have X amount of women's teams. You've got to have X amount of ability teams. So you've got a full ecosystem of boys, men, girls, women, and ability squads. So across the board, that becomes a club. That only works if you've got the facilities and if you've got the structure, right? So what they're doing is funding these guys. I think we're going to see the rise of really bad men's only clubs that will turn into super powerhouses, female only clubs. That's what we're starting to see already, because we've got a couple of examples in KitKing right now where you've got a dad who is part of a 2-star club. It's not getting, the chairman and the committee are like, it's the girls. So they don't get the same pitch time because the quality of football is not there. But these girls need to get going somewhere.
You've got to learn.
You've got to get, exactly. They've got to learn. They've got to be, they've got to fail to be successful. And some of these girls have only been playing 20 minutes. So you can't expect them, the 8-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy. Well, the boy's already had 4 years worth of football in him. Yeah. It's not a knife flight comparison. So, we've seen dads with daughters go, right, my daughters want to be a lioness. Screw it, I'm just going to go and set my own club up.
Oh, I see, okay.
And so suddenly, by just putting a few tweets and a few posts out there, they're getting 100 girls, 200 girls. And then it's like, oh, crap, there's demand.
Yeah.
And girls tend to want to be with girls. So I think we're going to see this shift, and there's going to be a real need to support these female-only clubs. Otherwise, they're always going to be treated as a 1 and 2 star, like a second-class citizen almost, with funding. So I think every governing body around the world has done 20, 30 years of building the men's game, and they're almost learning how to be entrepreneurial again.
I see, okay. They've almost settled. Well,
yeah, they have.
Yeah.
But now they realise the financial opportunity that's there. So that pyramid needs to be built. So you kind of need to go into, how am I going to, if there are 1,000 girls in that town, how can we provide 800 places? You've got to think about the market size, and they're kind of not doing that. And remember, that pyramid is, at the bottom end, it's all volunteers, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then you need to recruit more volunteers.
Yeah.
But the bit that is the underpinning is pitch time. You can't play sport without pitches. And that problem in football is going to be there. That problem in cricket is going to be there. Because my club, for example, we've got one pitch, and that pitch is used on a Saturday for the men's 1s and 2s. It's used on Sundays for the boys' development. Well, when are the girls going to play? When they become women, when are they going to play?
Yeah.
So they're going to get put on the midweek. Well, that's probably not viable for them, So we're going to start seeing problems come out.
Yeah, I guess what is brilliant is that the success that the Lionesses are having, as a very obvious example in England, is bringing that grassroots level up. Like the Emirates Stadium, Arsenal Stadium, got 11 women's fixtures this year, if not more. Yeah. It's amazing to see that that's starting to become at the top level a priority, which is then moving its way down. And what I'm really interested in, again, just to bring it slightly back, is the way that you see team culture developing. Because I know that teams and people is a massive part of business and your business strategy. So I'm interested in just almost a summary of what do you think sports does to improve someone's team efficacy, understanding, culture. What can you learn from a team?
Number one human problem that you find in any team, whether it's in the army or whether it's in business or on pitch, on court, is communication. So you learn how to communicate. You learn about your body language. You learn how to lose together, not as an individual, but together. You learn how to take positives out of a situation. You learn how to celebrate together.
I just want to briefly interrupt this podcast so I can talk to you about Nutrition Kitchen, who have kindly sponsored this episode. As entrepreneurs who are looking to stay as healthy as possible, fueling ourselves with high quality food without breaking the bank or wasting time can be tough day to day. Nutrition Kitchen solves that issue by delivering incredible meals to your door, tailored to your diet, whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, or maintain balance. They change their menus all the time so you can choose from a variety of dishes and leave the monotony of meal prepping behind. Now, back to our guest.
And all of those are kind of spun off points around communication. How many times have you seen professional athletes when the coach goes onto the sideline and does that and their body language just shifts, right? What does that do to the rest of the team? you're subbed off not because you're crap, because actually there's a tactical reason. And if toys are then thrown out the pram, what does that do to the wider 11, 15, including the bench, etc.? So for me, that is probably one of the biggest benefits.
So it almost helps you learn how to lose and think bigger than just you. Think for bigger vision.
Correct. But also from a point of view, self-awareness. So some if you actually look at a non-sporting person's life right now, the first time they'll actually get critical feedback is in the workplace after university.
Yeah.
So the first time they'll do a PDR, if their company gives them a PDR, would be when? 24, 23? I mean, so someone who's 8 and gets that versus someone who's 24 who gets that, it's a big difference. And there's ways that an 8-year-old can be given that, right? And that's questioning, that's the coach's skill. That's not, here's a PDR. It's, how does that make you feel? And what did you guys do well in that game? And actually the real, getting parents involved in that, the car journey home is probably the single biggest important part, because you've done whatever you've done, the coach has given you feedback, and as parents, you've got an opportunity to reflect on the car journey home. And the car journey home is really, really important.
I love that. That's so interesting, because one of my strongest memories of sport is getting up in the rain on a Sunday morning and having to go and play rugby and saying to my dad, I don't really want to go today. And he talking about, you're going to let your team down.
100%.
And then in the car on the way back, being like, that was so much fun. And him being like, you played well here, or you could have done this better. And that feedback, but you don't feel like it was just my performance. You feel like it was the team. Like we could have done that together. And that's really, really powerful.
You've just said something there, right? Turning up is part of it, because the impact that not turning up happens. Again, go to the workplace. I can't be asked to go into work today, I'm going to pull a sick day. Team sports people will subconsciously and consciously understand the impact on the business, especially when it's a small business, because it is a small team, right? So, one of my things that my dad always used to say, I come from a news agent background. Dad would take pride in his paper boys, because come rain, shine, sunshine, sleet, hail, snow, they always would turn up, right? And the ones that didn't wouldn't last more than 2 weeks. If you actually look at where all these paper boys are right now, it's really interesting. Really successful individuals, because they're really disciplined. It didn't matter, but they would turn up, even if their parents would drive them around when it was that bad weather-wise. Do you see what I mean? But that comes from home. That's their parents instilling that discipline. That happens in team sports naturally. So I think that is probably, much more important than whether you can be a Harry Kane.
Because that kind of person is in it for the full season, right? If you want to use the sports references, it's the same as someone who comes into work, whatever job it might be, they're in it for the full season. They've bought into the vision. We're doing this for the whole year. We're going to hit these goals.
Yeah.
Dibs, I want to touch on your family story. Okay. Because I think a lot of what you've learned about team culture and your values and your passion comes from your grandfather, right? And I know that you've had occasions recently or in the last couple of years where people have even told you the impact that your grandfather had on them or them as an employee. And I'm really interested to learn what happened. What did he teach you? Why was it so important to him?
So my family, both sides, mum's side and dad's side, are East African Indians. So emigrated from India to Uganda. And to be honest with you, I actually don't know when. I think it's great-grandfather's time. It's a bit blurry. Even my dad, I don't think, really knows the true history as to what went on there. So 3 generations ago, they set up businesses. That they were entrepreneurial, and they basically were really successful through the 60s. And actually, they acquired quite a lot of businesses. So over a 10-year stretch, became very, very successful business. My grandfather was part of. He was in a partnership with 2 others. And it was a very, very successful business. I recently found out one of the philosophies was every child that was a child of a worker, So whether it was a low-level worker, sweeping the sheds, or one of the management would go to the same school as his kids, paid for by the company. And the reason for that was he always saw businesses for two reasons. One, yes, there's a profitability part, but also you can really do good in society. So the biggest problem in Uganda and East Africa at that point was the big massive population wasn't particularly educated, weren't literate. So he felt as though it was necessary to give back to the local economy, and that's what he did. So every single member of staff's children would go to the same school as my dad. And that's when I found out, because we bumped into dad's schoolmates who were of Ugandan origin, and they said thank you. And it was like this really weird. It was really weird to figure that out, because it's not something that was ever mentioned until that point. So it was just done. And then, that you hear about stories around what that meant for his family and blah, blah, blah. So in early 1976, a dictator came in and basically said all Indians have got to be out of the country. The Indians were pretty much running the economy there. So you can imagine you've built this successful business, all your assets are frozen, and the government basically said, well, the dictator, I guess, would basically said, right, you're out. You've got a couple of weeks to pack your bags. All your assets are frozen. You can't cash anything in. If you've got any money in a bank, it's frozen. Nothing is yours. You basically got to leave with a suitcase, and that's it. So my father just happened to be in London studying and was being wired money. And he basically saved a lot of that, bought a business cash, bought a property cash, because he could do in those days. And within kind of 24 hours, the family kind of came over and was up and running and working, but basically started again from zero. So, yeah, I think what does that show? Well, actually, having a philosophy of business can do good is super important, because it can do, and it can impact a lot of people's lives. Having that contingency plan, you can call it what you want, but it's probably an element of luck that Dad was in at UCL in London at the time. So yeah, family coming over and actually not really having any state benefits whatsoever or anything like that. One of the questions I asked was, why didn't they go back to India? Well, actually they were forced to give up their Indian passport for a British passport. So when they tried to go back, India actually said no to them and kind of said, actually, you're not our problem. So even though we have property and land in India, so we could just go back, in inverted commas, home, actually this 100,000 odd so people were rejected. So that's why you see a lot of Patels, Shahs, mysteries that came over from East Africa to England, and they settled in North London and Leicester in the 70s.
Yeah, it's so interesting, that story. And so when your grandfather got to London...
freezed his backside off, yeah.
Yeah, I bet, yeah, of course. Thought the food was terrible, everything, yeah, not happy. Do you think how did his philosophy of looking after the community, building that team culture, how did that really impact the business? I know he was successful. He bought businesses as well as just scaling them, right? How did that all come together? And you also touched on your father there looking after his team really well. So it clearly has come down at least one generation.
Yeah, Dad's been. I think. Look, he had 6 kids. He had, he didn't have anything. So. It was very like the business at that point in time. They went from this business that was essentially a combination of a stone quarry, a timber yard. That they were infrastructure-based business in the building industry. Completely walking away from that and becoming a newsagent's operator in Hampstead. It's a really nice part of London. And Dad basically pinpointed Hampstead or Chelsea. They didn't really have a clue, but they trusted Dad, and my grandfather went, let's go north, because then at least we can go up the M1 type thing, so at least we can travel north. So that was the only logic that they had. Otherwise, we would have been South London if you'd chosen, So it's Arsenal or Chelsea, right? So we went Arsenal. So I think once that DNA is there, it didn't really come out for a while because you're hand to mouth. And I think first generation immigrants are pretty much generally a hand to mouth. So they hustle, they work hard, time for money. And because of where the age gap was, my father was in his 20s, so he had no option but to hustle again. So you then had this 5-year period of living a very low, just a low level lifestyle, 5 people in a room, that type of thing, all family kind of just quashing together, and then saving to expand. But whilst you've got that journey, you've got to marry people off. You've got to, all that was happening at the same time. So a very, very expensive 10 years for the family. So I don't think there wasn't any members of staff at that point because it was all family. Then there was a bit of a break, and I don't know the details, but my mum and dad ended up moving out to Essex and starting again from scratch. My dad was about my age, about 40, starting again from scratch. That's when he started having staff. And that's when actually pretty much everyone that was with him at the beginning was there at the end. So that staff loyalty was there. And some of the things that I learned from Dad were very much around empowering your team, trusting them, hire slow, fire fast. So be really picky about who he brings in, trust them, and if they broke that trust, that was it. So I think that's the stuff that we saw more of, rather than the stuff that my grandfather did, because when they did have the money, they did it, but they didn't have the money to do it, if you know what I mean.
It's really interesting though, because there's a sports background and then the team was the family.
Yes.
So you can see the values building up.
Yep.
So then when you do have staff, you're going to treat them like
within
family.
that, 100%,
also within the values. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. Did you know when you were growing up that your father had bought businesses? Was that a conversation, or did you just think, he just has a job, or what did you know?
No, it was, but it didn't. It was. So I knew that he had taken on and bought these 2 businesses. Well, he actually has done 8 in total, but the 2 that we were kind of part of, if you will, from the age of 9, I think the one in Chelmsford, or the 2 in Chelmsford, first one in Chelmsford in Essex. But you don't. I think at that point in time, you didn't think of the severity of it. You know what I mean? And also, back in those days, there wasn't really a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's. Small shops were everywhere. So, you could just literally go in, find one, shake hands and do a deal. It was as simple as that. So it's not as complex as it is now. And those types of deals are out there, but they're all kind of self-employed deals. They're not business deals, if that makes sense. So they're owner-operated businesses that you're kind of switching out. So yes, he did them, but they were owner-operated businesses. They weren't, with management in place and people, they were just staff that would come in, run the shop, go home. So it's slightly different.
Yeah, it's just interesting that that's sort of, it's something that you were slightly aware of. Obviously, you're a seasoned investor now. You know what you're doing. You do this very similar thing, obviously at a larger, probably
as big as, exactly the same, by the way.
Oh, really?
It's 100% exactly the same. Like everything that my dad did with significantly, no legals to start with. Everything's done on a handshake. Huge level of trust. Now the principles of that still remain. KitKing came along. We did a deal. 100 days later, COVID came along. We both wasted huge amount of money on legals when actually the handshake was the bit that was important, because we both kind of realised that, okay, we've got all these legals, but if we rely on those legals, there won't be no business. So let's do right for the business first, because COVID's come. So
exactly. It is kind of crazy, and you've been very open that you don't think you've got the skills to get a business from 0 to 1 million yourself, but the 1 to whatever you're very good at. You're very good at
correct.
Did you try to run a startup? Did you try?
Yeah, I've done a few startups. Yeah.
Really? Okay. So when was it that you realised that if you just get a business, you can scale it massively once it's already been jump started?
great question. I don't think there was a realisation. Well, probably the Harbour Club, actually. Probably the Harbour Club. I was doing it before, and I bought a couple of businesses which weren't. I didn't buy the entity, but bought the assets. So you just buy the website and the brand or whatever. So we've done that, and I was like, okay. But then as a team, myself, my wife, my brother-in-law, we wanted to go one step further. So, going one step further was then the limited company. And we decided in 2018 that I would go on to the Harbour Club, which I think, you need to go and do. And then it's like Jeremy's mind is just that of a genius. He just thinks differently, and I would put money on him outdoing the best lawyers in the world, the best accountants in the world, because he just thinks differently.
Wow.
So just listening to him for a couple of days, what happened was in the first module, I found KitKing. So by lunch on day one, I'd got a meeting done.
Action takers and money makers.
Yeah,
that's unreal.
I was like, come on, let's get this done, right? So you're gonna show me this, right? Cool, let's do this. So I started searching. I'm there with my iPad. I should be taking notes, and then I was like, cool. And then by I think that lunchtime, the broker had reached out, and the broker had nothing to do with the deal. Never met.
Oh, wow.
All the broker did was to advertise.
No way.
And Richard wanted that because Richard's view was he was the best person to sell his own business.
I see. Okay. So what is it in your mind that makes you very good at going from 1 to whatever million? Like, what is it that you can do that you think is best suited for that kind of business?
So most businesses under 50 mil, and that sounds like a steep number, but it's true. Most of them have got a problem or two problems. 5 core disciplines of any business: sales, marketing, product or the service, finance and operations. You're going to have at least 2 of those areas that are punching, doing really well, and there's going to be at least 2 of those areas that are pulling it back. So it's identifying what are the problems and then looking at it going, okay, now what? How are we going to run this? And then once you've got one discipline right, you then invest in another area to then flatline the growth or increase the growth and blah, blah, blah. So it's identifying what those problems are. Generally speaking, you can find out the problem. My method is I like to understand the business before the numbers.
Okay.
Because you can figure out quite a lot by just talking to the owner. Because as soon as you see the numbers will cloud your decision making. So there's no point, in my opinion. Everyone does it differently. Yeah. But I like to listen and do at least 2, maybe 3 meetings of just chatting through the person. And then you can start going, right, now let's look at the numbers. And you do those numbers together because then you've heard the story behind the numbers. And so then you can catch out if there's any BS.
Yeah, yeah.
If you see the numbers always can be massaged. You can move an invoice here and there. Eventually, if you look over a broader period of time, you'll catch it. But generally speaking, a small business is, almost like a dinghy in a mass ocean. It only takes a couple of waves and boom, you're topped over. So you need to be able to read the person and figure out why they're making these decisions. Is there not enough in money because they've drawn too much? Is there not? If finance is the problem. The last 3 conversations, I got one business where there is no sales pipeline. Brilliant. There's one that has absolutely no sales and marketing pipeline, so they've got no skills around that. Brilliant. I've got one where the owner is drawn too much. He doesn't understand his numbers, and he's so far further down that by the time he takes his money, then he's seen his management report. It's taken 3 months.
I see. Okay.
Do you see what I mean? So he's not on it. He's not doing it maliciously. He just doesn't know. Yeah. So you've got all these different scenarios that are out there. So I've got one which is a straightforward divorce, where there's nothing wrong. I'm like looking at it going, why? What are you selling? And then after 2, so we're divorcing, but the third shareholder is the son, doesn't know.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's really interesting. So when you're looking at a business, you're looking for an issue in one of those 5 things. Is that what you're looking to invest in?
Well, that becomes your opportunity to fix it.
Sure. Okay.
So before the podcast started, you're talking about, valuations.
Yeah.
Well, if there is no methodology of how to value it. So ultimately it's what they're willing to sell for and what you're willing to give them. And what you're willing to give them is spread over a period of time. So it's just figuring out that bit. But the point here is you want to beat that number.
Yeah.
So therefore you need to have a look at what value can you add to the business? What can you do to fix? And that becomes a really exciting thing.
That's what I really like. I like finding opportunity. It's like starting a business, isn't it? You've got to try and find an opportunity, then almost create a boring solution to make sure it's going to work.
100%.
And that's what you've spoken about before, right? Boring businesses make money. They're the ones you want to look after.
Yeah. 100%.
So what did KitKing? Why was KitKing perfect for you? Why the businesses that you're buying now? How does that group grow? What's so good about it?
So if we take it a step back, I left my corporate job at Speedo and then didn't pay myself for basically a year, if not 2. Joined the family business. My father-in-law was the first person to put a cover on a hot water bottle in 1976. Wow. So he was the true out-and-out entrepreneur, an absolute product person. So really strong at one area, one discipline. Operationally, the business was all over the place. Financially, was all over the place. Sales-wise, was all over the place. Marketing-wise, was all over the place. So the first 2 years was getting those 4 areas to the right level. No key accounts of really any worth. So they did have them, by the way. They just lost them.
I see.
Right. So over a 10-year period, they did a 20-year period. Slowly, everyone disappeared. So the first thing was to basically balance out that business, build a brand, build e-commerce, just all the obvious things. It's not rocket science. Only downside with hot water bowls, we're sitting in Dubai, so it's probably a dumb question. When would you buy hot water bowls? Which time of year do you buy them in the UK?
Middle of winter.
Yeah. So you only got a 6-week window, really. So you've ultimately got, if it's a mild window, you've got a window of 12 weeks. I mean, you name me how many successful businesses invoice for 12 weeks, right? It's just not going to happen. So you make loads of money in 6 weeks, and then you lose loads of money for, in June, July, August, categorically, you're losing money. But then you're paying deposits up front for the next round of cycle. I mean, if your buying is wrong, all your cash that you've made just disappears into bad buying decisions. And that had happened over a number of years. So we just put basic principles in place, basic disciplines in the boring element, and boom, we're profitable now, right? We've got cash to be able to invest. So then we went and acquired these asset-based deals. So there's Kids Travel 2, which was a children's luggage business. Why? Because e-commerce play, so it's quite quick cash into the business. Biggest invoice months were when? Right, the opposite end of the year. Yeah, June, July, August.
Filling your gaps in, thinking about it as a group.
Correct. And thinking about it from a cash flow point of view and going, actually, we can churn our resources and actually employ an e-commerce person rather than hacking it for 4 months. Well, because then they can run on it on Kids Travel 2, and then they can run on and work on hot water bottles afterwards. So that's how we then started to build and build and build. Then we landed some key accounts with hot water bowls, and at that point it was like, right, this now we're growing. Well, guess what? We've got back to square one again because we're hemorrhaging the same problem. That 12-week period is just spiked now. We might have gone and we had a little peak, and now we've got 2 peaks. Well, actually now we're 4 years on and we've got a massive peak. So we need another massive peak to level it out, and that's where KitKing came on.
Oh, I see. Okay, it was almost just to plug a gap, but it's become this massive business with the high level.
So initially it was like, okay, so we're at the Harbour Club, we're just looking at buying in certain businesses. What's the rationale? Well, the rationale is to make sure that from a cash flow point of view as a group, we can start churning all year round. And so here's something that is there that could potentially work at the football season and the run up to the football season. May through to September is your biggest period. So from a group point of view, it starts to become quite interesting. And you can transfer the skills. A warehouse can be used for different products. Your accounting function can be used for different products. Your buying function can be used for different products. Your e-commerce can be used for different products and brands. So, that was the low-hanging fruit, I guess, with KitKing. And we're really transparent about that with Richard from the start. So, yeah, and then as we kind of went through the journey after acquisition, you then start to look at it and go, well, actually, KitKing's a standalone beast in itself, and actually cricket comes along, and suddenly now cricket becomes a really big invoiced Q1. Education, is another opportunity. University is another opportunity. So actually, KitKing is its own beast, 12 months a year. So that's kind of the logic behind that.
Isn't it? It's like the biggest provider of Nike products.
So we're not the biggest, but we're one of
in the UK.
In the UK, yeah.
Yeah, it's insane, isn't it? So you've got these things happening that just wasn't even supposed to happen, but it's become
it was. So historically, Richard was. He was the entrepreneur. He was the baby boomer entrepreneur, like my father, like my father-in-law. So you got these similar traits. So really good at spotting opportunities, really bad at executing them. Right. So Richard was fantastic. He could see. I mean, actually, he listening to him is just amazing, because like, what have you done? And he's like, oh yeah, I've sold windows. Had a window business. Cool. What else? Oh yeah, I had a pub, had a nightclub, had this. Right. So sports industry was just one of a long line of activities that he's been in. Made a bit of money and then moved on to the next thing. So he's an out-and-out entrepreneur. Yeah. So he built what I would say is a minimal viable product. He built something that was churning over, had big problems, and he was on the market to sell for 10 years. But if you actually strip it back, he was one of the first Nike accounts when Nike started opening grassroots accounts. He was the first to go online in the industry in 2003.
Wow.
It's a really, really long foresight. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the website was awful, by the way, when we took it over. Every order was taken off the website and handwritten.
Wow.
To then be put around the business.
But what's really cool, like I love that, because you found something that was really good, probably a passion project of his that then obviously grew to a decent sized business, but you were able to then use the skills that you've got to grow it. But more than that, it aligns with your values so much and your story and everything together.
Correct.
So when I was doing the research for this episode, there was 4 things that came up that you tend to always do with your businesses that I think really just personify what you do in a business and almost the person that you are. I've written them down. So there was the vision. You always make sure there's a big shared vision.
100%, yeah.
Team, your people first, which is throughout the whole story and your sport.
Yeah.
Automation, so you're big on, you just touched on there, the website, big on improving systems. If you don't need to do it, let's not do it.
Yeah.
Or let's do it better. And then audience, and this is a really good one that not enough people do, speak to the customer. So why do those 4 things keep coming up? Where did that come from? Why is that so important? How do you tell your team that that's what you're going to work on?
Well, I've not done any of those things. Like, there's not like a prescription. It's probably the first time I've heard of it like that. Just go back to the first one. So
you've got vision.
That's just me.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the phrase BHAG? B-H-A-G. Big, hairy, ambitious goals.
No.
So I said to the guys at KitKing the vision when we took over, and I then heard about 6 months later they were all talking, these new members of staff, these are the old members of staff that we inherited, and they I heard about 6 to 8 months afterwards that they said that I had visions of grandeur. We only now, for a number of different reasons, we only now have 2 left, and I've said to them, remember that meeting? They're like, yeah, it's ingrained. So they didn't believe, they now absolutely believe. But when you've done a life of no vision and just coming up to work and churning and then going home, it's a pretty soulless reason for turning up to work. And here comes a bloke that's kind of selling a vision, and you're like, bullshit, basically. And I think, that vision piece, unless you understand what that can do to an organisation, it can be quite dangerous, actually. And I found that initially because there's a lot of resistance of why we're doing this. We had COVID going on at the time and lockdowns and all this kind of stuff. But actually, that was the biggest opportunity to get to our vision, because everybody was on furlough, right? So we just put our foot down and we kept a small team together, and furlough allowed you to train staff.
Yeah.
So we could train our staff on new systems and processes which were digitally centric rather than paper-based systems and processes. Because you can imagine if everything was paper-based, you had to come back to the sodding office, right? So the first lockdown we ran, and we did a huge sprint, and we basically fully digitised the entire organisation whilst training people. When Boris went sports back on, we went through version 1. Boris went sports or lockdown 2. It was like, right, cool, let's run on V2 now, because we'd learned loads, a whole heap of errors and mistakes. So I think those that have bought into the vision will buy into it. Those that won't will just disappear. And actually, it's a big signal as to those that are not invested. What was the second one?
Second one was team. So you've kind of touched on that one as well.
Two are linked.
Yeah, and then automation. So improving systems.
So all of the businesses that we have taken on have been really good businesses. The biggest issue within them is that they just didn't have, they were running an old school way, so they just didn't use the most up-to-date systems and processes. Small businesses that are run by baby boomers tend to be antiquated, and it's not a big generalisation, but whenever I see ones that are up for sale, you're like, oh, okay, smile and nod. Your whole inventory is run off Google, like a Google Excel, Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet. You're like, so what happens if you've got 3 people that want to change the spreadsheet? But that's what happens, because I can't afford to put an inventory control system in place, right? So, and do you know what? It works. Yeah. So, and then you've got to put yourself in the owner's shoes and go, well, if a system is going to cost 20 grand, my gross margin is 30%. Well, actually, I need to be delivering 60 grand worth of sales to justify the 20 grand's worth of, don't worry about it.
Do you know what?
I'll just carry on. I'll just carry on.
There was such a good Alex Hormozy video yesterday.
Okay.
Did you see this one where he was talking about he's got a team of 5 accountants and they spend something like 2 hours a week each doing this really boring task, and they came to him and said, can we invest in a system or a software that does this for us? He got a quote for it and it was something like $70,000, but he worked out that it would save this team in total something like 8 hours a week, but in total those 8 hours a week that he's spending was only like $20,000 a year.
Right.
So he's like, there's a really big thing in not systemizing for the sake of just getting more efficient and just automating for the sake of it. You think it's better, and also going to make your business worth more. Yeah. So it's actually really interesting. What you said
so you've got to be smart with what you operate and what you automate and how you automate it. You can't automate loads of things, because otherwise you just get a robot. And especially if you're seasonal, robot can't think about weather or football seasons and pandemics and all. So you've got to be a bit careful about that stuff. But yeah, I think we have automated to a good point, but actually with AI coming into the mix now, we now need to go again. Sure. And we need to now look at new areas of automation that could come through where the human is more the editor rather than the doer. So yeah, the next phase I think will it's that ongoing thing of just never being happy and always improving all the time. 1% changes throughout the business all the time. So but yeah, if you've come from an analog world and here's this bloke that's coming in trying to talk about and sell you AI, like really? No, like, you got to take people through a journey, otherwise you'll just lose them. So but you will no doubt lose them because they're really, really skilled at a system that they're just not relevant for. And they'll be really skilled in another company where that skill is valued. But as you start to move on and the business starts to move on, sometimes they're not the right people. And sometimes you need to bring in new people.
That's the way of the world, isn't it?
Correct.
You have to hire startup people for a startup, and it's different for a scale up, and then a high performance business needs a different kind of person.
100%.
Specialist. We spoke recently actually about the need for hiring Swiss Army knives, and then as you grow you need more and more bread knives. You need one person. And the final one was audience. You're a people person, you're good at the talking and building connections. How important is it for you to go and speak to an audience or a new audience when you're buying or thinking about buying a company? So the audience is made up of 3. So you got the customers. So that is one audience. I look at the staff and the team as another audience. And then probably in our industry, the most important audience is our supply chain. So your Nikes, your Adidas, your Pumas, etc. Brands are just like sports teams; they go through cycles. Right now, Adidas is, in my humble opinion, having an absolute stinker, right? And pretty much Puma and Nike are doing a really, really good job. Joma are doing a really, really good job.
But yeah, having that piece of the jigsaw puzzle is really important, just as much as your staff. And the staff are actually, you've got to look at the team that you're inheriting, and they are probably the single deciding factor on doing those deals.
I love that. I think that's amazing, because people are the engine. Businesses are just collections of people, aren't they?
Yeah.
Which you've sort of personified and highlighted throughout this entire conversation. Dips, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Cool.
Brilliant. If you like these episodes, feel free to subscribe to our Healthy Hustle newsletter below, where you'll get behind the scenes information from our guests, as well as from the studio operator who helps us create these cinematic episodes. It's also full of business advice and tips, and it will help you join the community of healthy entrepreneurs.